Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, and I provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by... a weak drum beat there, buddy.
Well, you took away my my water jug. So.
It's brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, and professional and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com. And I'm so excited to welcome to our show today, Victoria Beckman. Victoria, it is so nice to see you today.
Thank you. Nice seeing you today, too.
Absolutely. So Victoria leads the America's Digital Crimes Unit at Microsoft, which is responsible for implementing strategies to disrupt cybercrime and advancing policy and legislation throughout the region. Prior to practicing law, Victoria was an industrial engineer in the technology and automotive sectors and a competitive figure skater for her native country, Colombia. I love that. I wish we could see some of the actual figure skating today.
Not today, no.
Not today.
Not these days.
Super fascinating. I love figure skating, except I can't even put on a skate. That's like the end of my capabilities right there. Well, it's so lovely to meet you. And for anyone who has not met Victoria before, you must follow her on LinkedIn. She produces some of the most amazing content, which is how we met, because your insights and the way you summarize what's happening in the privacy and security industry is very, very, very helpful. So we're delighted to have you here today to talk more about the world of cybercrime, which is very busy these days.
Yes. Well, thank you. And it is indeed very easy, which gives me a little bit of job security, I guess, but it's not good for everyone else.
No. So talk to us a little bit about how you got to dealing with cybercrime in today's era.
It has been kind of luck, to be honest with you. Most of the things in my career haven't been planned or something that I had this goal of working, doing this or the other. Most of it has been that I kind of had to reinvent myself when I moved to a different country. When I moved to the US from Colombia, then I had to move states from Arizona to Ohio, then Ohio to Florida. And so it's been the result of mostly just what do I do now that I live here? But in a nutshell, I was an engineer, ended up because of immigration requirements, having to go back to school to maintain my visa, and out of a bed, really. I ended up going to law school. I came here almost 20 years ago on September 11, 2001. And I didn't speak any English. And when I decided to go back to school, one of my friends kind of made a bet and said, oh, you should take the LSAT. It has a lot of reading comprehension, and you will know if you're actually fluent in English and if you can take a standardized test in English. And that's how the idea came about. No one in my family is an attorney. I never even kind of care about what attorneys did. And that's how I ended up in law school, basically. And then because of my background, my heart was really in being a public defender, but because of my background, they gave me issues related to intellectual property at first, and then a case related to a hacker. And I didn't know anything. I didn't really understand anything with that first case, but I did like the subject area, and so I said, well, if this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to work at a firm, then I like this. And then I started to kind of work and learn about it. Now, Microsoft, landing in Microsoft, it was also kind of luck. I have a Colombian friend who is an attorney at Microsoft in Redmond. And she originally contacted me and said, oh, they have a role that has been vacant for months because they're looking for a very specific profile and someone who is bilingual in English and Spanish and licensed in the US and all kinds of things. But it is in Florida. And I say, well, then no, I'm not interested. I wasn't planning to move. And then after conversation, somehow they convinced me. My family lives all in Colombia, so there was a lot of push from that side too, because it's closer and easier and cheaper to come visit in Florida than in Ohio. So ultimately, I accepted the job, and I've been there for about 6 months.
Well, congratulations on the new job, and welcome to Florida. Someone who used to live right where you are. It's a good place. I think you'll enjoy Florida, especially in the wintertime.
Yes.
Just don't drive from Atlanta to Florida.
Don't do that.
Now, there are a lot of things that I'm learning here, but I like it so far.
So why don't we kick off and talk a little bit about the number one tip that we get on our podcast, which is, what is the best security tip? And everyone inevitably says MFA. And we'd love to start from your perspective as to, in your opinion, why is MFA so critical to protecting against cybercrime?
Well, authentication in general, I think, is very important because it enables organizations to keep their networks, their assets secure by allowing only authenticated users or processes to have access to those resources they're trying to protect. But obviously, multi-factor authentication is safer and better than a two-factor authentication. These kind of multiple layers of security ensure that the users are who they're claiming to be. I think is also a little bit of the beauty of it is that it's not very complicated to implement, and it could add a level of security remotely. And now with the pandemic, you can manage that. It is also because there's been a rise in stealing passwords, and with phishing and all this kind of brute force attacks. And so having this multi-factor authentication reduces the risk and reduces the consequences of any of those things. From the legal standpoint, it also sometimes helps you meet legal requirements. There are some companies that have to deal with the PCI DSS standards. It is required. Some laws that have been enacted lately that provide these safe harbor defenses to negligence cases if you implement a cybersecurity strategy or an information security program. Basically, say you have to follow these type of things, including multi-factor authentication. So it's just great, and why not?
What are some of the mistakes that you see companies make when they're deploying security tools, right? You've just talked about MFA, how that one's fairly simple to use. There's also other ones that are a little bit more complex. Would love to hear what you see from different companies.
Well, and we have to consider that I'm an attorney. I'm not necessarily an expert on the technical aspect of things. So there may be a lot of technical mistakes, but kind of from a global perspective, I think one of the mistakes is companies following fads or kind of having this knee-jerk reaction to regulation or to attacks. So, for example, when, I don't know, 2 years ago, when companies had to implement the California Consumer Privacy Act, you see companies saying, oh, we have to implement this, or we have to buy this software, when they didn't even know if the law applied to them and what they had to do, and whether or not they actually needed some tool or some software. So it's just because everybody was talking about it. So that's kind of one thing, which results in this kind of decentralized policy management that I don't think is ever a good idea. You have to have an information security and privacy policy that is unified and that everybody understands, and that is not this kind of like silos working separately. I also think another mistake maybe is that companies tend to concentrate a lot on detection of threats and not too much on prevention of threats, and kind of doing their homework and investing in preventing things, not just reacting to something, which is kind of similar to what I said, but it is also, there is a lot that could be reduced in terms of time and resources in doing all this threat hunting if you prevent with a stronger system ahead of time. I also see that sometimes there is no pre-implementation testing. So some organizations just buy software or buy tools without even testing if it's something that is the results they need or that is going to fit their organization and their internal policies. And kind of, again, with keeping with the trend, is not keeping these systems or these tools updated. I think we have seen that a lot of the attacks and related attacks have been the result of not patching, not having updated even backups. And so the companies tend to, okay, I installed this, I have this, great. We don't even look back at what's going on, or whether we have to update it, or whether this is not something that we still need.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think it's really important for companies to understand what some of those big risks are. And we appreciate you highlighting some of those big ones.
So going to another fun topic we often hear on this show is, hey, it's in the cloud, so it's safe and there's nothing more we need to do. Check that box. And as you know, we have a lot of data moving to the cloud. That is one of the larger trends we're having in business. So love to hear your perspective on why that comment might not be right.
Well, first, not only because of where I work, but in general, I'm a firm believer of the cloud, just because of the principle of leaving the experts be experts at what they do. So if you are a company that, I don't know, manufactures shoes, but you have to have, a system that is secure, then there are companies that are spending time and money in making sure that the cloud is safe. And so then you kind of take a little bit of the headache with letting the experts do all the security. But in terms of the considerations that companies have to have, is that one is not a one size fits all. Obviously, there are different models of migrating and different ways to do it based on priorities and cost. You could also have a hybrid model. And again, from the legal perspective, which is kind of what I'm always worried about, I think there are some considerations. For example, the software that you have may require some kind of additional licensing to go into the cloud. So you have to review that. You also have to review contractual obligations that you have with vendors and with clients sometimes. Some of the contracts say, have specific requirements as to whether or not the information could be stored in the cloud or where servers could be located. So you have to make sure that you're complying with all those contractual requirements. I also think that adopting the cloud or migrating to the cloud is kind of a change for the organization, a cultural change and an environmental change in a way. So you have to make sure that you have the capabilities, not only the resources that you need, that you train your employees, and that everybody kind of knows that it's not just, oh, it's in the cloud, we're fine. There is a lot of training and understanding what's going on and how the cloud works in your system, and how even though it's in the cloud, you still have to follow the protocols and whatever else you need to follow. So yeah, I think that that would be the main.
Who would be some of those key players that companies should think about to have that conversation? You mentioned, the contracts. So to me, that's legal. Then we think about training of employees. There might be one person who's responsible for implementing it, but that could be different for the person who's responsible for securing it. Maybe in your experience, if you can share, who are some of the key people who are a part of that conversation to protecting the data as it's getting moved to the cloud?
Well, I think my personal view of who I think should be involved is different to what happens in real life, in the sense that obviously you see a lot of like the IT department or the more technical people involved in this, when in reality, I think it should involve everyone at just different levels and different ways to disseminate the information. So there has to be buy-in from the executive and the C-level into believing that cybersecurity is important, why you have to have it, why you may want to migrate to the cloud, what systems you want to have in the cloud. So all that at the end of the day is also a business decision. So you have to evaluate the risk, just like you will have to evaluate for anything, for buying a new building. So you have to involve the CFO, the CEO, even from that kind of logistics and operational standpoint. But anyone else in the organization is equally important, because at the end of the day, what you have is your employee people handling and having access to the systems. So we see a lot of the attacks are the result of human error, and so you have to train employees to, again, not have this concept of, oh, well, our IT department has this in the cloud, we're all good. And then, they don't realize that they could be opening the door to a cyber attack, or that they should be having some considerations and there are steps they have to follow in securing the information, in transferring the information. So in my opinion, everyone should be involved. And then you just kind of address the message differently depending on the role.
Well, you talked about part of the challenge being the human errors that we make, but kind of looking over the horizon. From my perspective, I think the next type of threat from cyber criminals is they're going to go after the integrity of data, where they're going to manipulate it and say, hey, Airbus, are you sure that your avionics work the way that they should? And do you want to fly that commercial flight? From your perspective, looking over the horizon, what do you see as possibly the next set of threats from cyber criminals that we're going to have to grapple with?
I feel like we're always in for a surprise with these kinds of attacks, but I will think, based at least on what we see and kind of the trends that we're seeing, obviously nation-sponsored attacks are a big risk and are increasing. There are some players that are kind of well known, and I think there may be an increasing other players kind of joining this circle of attackers. I also think, as we have seen, that the increasing in like supply chain and managed service providers attacks will increase, just because it is more effective. If you're attacking the supply chain, then you're having all this kind of wave of attacks that happen, and wave of consequences, and therefore more victims that you can probably get money from. So I think that that's going to be a trend. We also have seen an increasing amount of attacks to critical infrastructure, and we've seen the phenomena, I guess, of firmware, which is the attack. Unlike ransomware, is kind of an attacks that attack the operating system. this firmware are kind of like for high functioning electronics or Internet of Things, and is attached to kind of the base of the operating system. And I think they're more complicated to do from the attacker's perspective. You have to have very specific skills. But if you actually get there and you attack, then the consequences could be worse. And that also means that they could attack a little bit less sophisticated systems that run water, like treatment plants or an oil or gas pipeline, as we have seen. And then I also think that ransomware is here to stay, that is increasing, that is the demand for payments, and the based on the studies that we do, the amount requested is constantly increasing, is more sophisticated. And they're also changing, and we've seen some wiper malware when it's not just encrypting, but they wipe your entire system just for the fun of doing it, I guess. So definitely an increase in the sophistication of the attack.
I wanted to ask you a follow-up if you might want to share your opinion. So in my cyber circles, one of the big debates that's been raging is whether or not ransomware payments should simply be outlawed and made illegal. And just wanted to know if you had any thoughts or what you think of that debate.
I haven't really thought about it, but just at first glance, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea just because we're not prepared. There are a lot of companies that have to pay the ransomware because it's the only way to recover their systems. And if we talk about, for example, municipalities that don't have a lot of resources or government agencies, and they can pay the ransomware, or like the what's the pipeline's name?
Colonial.
Starts with them. The Colonial.
They're in our backyard.
Okay, so we later learned that they have paid and maybe they shouldn't, and all the debate, but there are companies like that are essential, and that the only way they have is. So I think before allowing ransomware payments, maybe we need to do more work in improving the infrastructure, improving the training, improving the response that companies have to these incidents, so that they actually, can rebuild their systems or can function and respond to those kinds of attacks without having to pay.
On the theme of training, which has been something that we've talked a couple times about here, what are some of the best practices that you see for how to get a company's employees to really understand and absorb the training? We see sometimes they'll do, here's the once a year I check the box so they can show that they did some training. There's others who have monthly communications, role-based training, top-down approach. Would love to, from your career experience and working with different companies, what do you find is successful?
Well, I think a little bit like I said before, I think the key to success in any kind of training is that the company truly believes and knows the importance of cybersecurity, that there is buy-in from the executive level and all the way from the top down. Because otherwise it will be that exercise of check here and we're done. But I also think that it's important for people, for all of us, for on a day-to-day basis, to understand and make it relevant to their jobs. So I don't know, if I'm working in a manufacturing plant, for example, and my job is to do something very repetitive, I may think like, what do I have to do with that? So the training has to be relevant to their particular function, and maybe I like to use a lot of real life examples that are kind of that we all understand. So I talk a lot about, for example, the Target breach, because a lot of us go to Target. Some of us spend a lot of time and money on Target. Talk about Equifax in the sense of your credit report, and you need it when you're going to buy a house or a car or things like that. So I feel like if it's more something more kind of your common day-to-day activities, you will understand and you will care more. Yeah, if they attack your bank and suddenly you take. So it's a little bit of kind of like storytelling and making it fun. Just kind of like when you teach kids, you have to make something fun and do songs. I yet have to create a song about cybersecurity, but something that that makes it fun for people to learn.
And be our new business. We're going to create a song for cybersecurity.
I shouldn't be singing anything either, so feel free.
But I can't agree with you more. I was just talking with a company yesterday about the same idea. You need to tell stories. You need to find a way to connect it to the person, because how many people are going to want their paycheck taken from their bank account? Not very many. If you teach them how to secure that, they'll get used to it and begin to apply that over here. The same with kids. We've had a couple episodes very focused on kid safety. Same idea. If you're able to connect with parents and help them understand the dangers, they again might be able to connect it more to the workplace. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Really,
I think social media is a good example. You said I can't see here and tell somebody like, well, so this is the strategy and this is the framework, and then no one is going to care. But if you talk about, imagine if someone stole your password and got into your Instagram account and posted this then they're going to care. So.
Yes, I can't tell you how many people I know who have their Instagram accounts taken over and they don't have multi-factor on it. And then their account's taken over. All kinds of interesting things happen from there.
I'm thinking about how can we repurpose Billy Joel's song, "We Didn't Start the Fire," for cybersecurity. I think it can be done. I'm going to figure it out.
IPP conference, here we come.
I can't wait for the release of this cybersecurity privacy album.
I'm thinking either you two can do a duet, but I'm thinking I'm going to figure out how to repurpose that song, like MFA, blown. I don't know.
No, you guys can take the idea and run with it. I don't.
There you go.
I like it.
All right.
Well, anyway, as we ask all of our guests, what is your best cyber tip?
That's a difficult one. I think for users, for people like you and I, is to remember that your phone and your mobile devices are very powerful machines and have very important and sensible information. I think because we use them for everything, we sometimes forget, what we do in terms of security, where we leave our phones, what information we save and how we save it. So that's my advice for family and friends.
I love it.
And for companies, I will always say that prevention is better than reaction. I often, when I work at the firm, I often heard people, CFOs saying, but this is so expensive. We're not going to pay this much to implement this, or we're not going to pay for this software. And then you tell them, well, but you're going to have to pay this much when you have an attack. And not only that, but you may have reputational consequences. You may have to deal with enforcers with the law. So it's better to spend the money now and do it right from the beginning than have the headaches later.
Excellent advice. Now, when you're not talking about privacy and security all day long, what do you like to do for fun?
A lot of things, actually. Pre-pandemic, I like to travel a lot, and I like to just see new languages. I have lived in different countries, and I always love that. I actually, and this is even before this, I actually love podcasts because I have always been a radio person more than a TV person. My dad always listened to the radio, and I grew up just used to listening to the radio my whole life. So before actually my commute and listening to the radio was kind of my me time, and I will normally have coffee, and I love that. After my days of being a figure skater, I like to exercise, but I don't like going to a gym. I just can't. So I try to do rock climbing. I have tried, I have tried like CrossFit stuff. I have tried all kinds of things just to keep myself entertained. All kinds of things. I'm one of those people also that just will try anything, will be down for anything. So anything that people say, oh, have you tried this? I'll try it.
Well, in your new home, in your new city, stand-up paddleboarding is pretty popular if you haven't tried that. There's a variety of places nearby to be able to do that. My co-host over here is a huge stand-up paddleboarder.
Awesome. I'll definitely have to try that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for sharing so much of your insights with us. How can people connect with you to continue to learn?
Well, the only social media I have is LinkedIn because of my paranoia. So I don't have Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or any of that. But definitely LinkedIn. Definitely, they can always send me a message. I have met tons of people, including you, Jody, through LinkedIn and the message of, I'd like to hear what you do or something like that. And that's probably the best way.
That sounds perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.